Financial stress doesn't usually start with the numbers. It starts with the feeling. That moment you see headlines about super collapses or product failures and think, could this happen to me? Today's episode is about cutting through the fear and explaining what actually protects people from something going wrong. Welcome to the Evalesco Healthy, Wealthy and Happy podcast. My name is Jeff, and I'll be your host today, and I'm very pleased to be joined by Lisa from the Evalesco team. Welcome along, Lisa. So Lisa brings AFSL governance and risk management lens to the system. She's a very important part of the Evalesco business and how we go about protecting our clients from behind the scenes. If recent headlines have left you feeling uneasy, today is about clarity, not alarm. So before we get into the recent headlines, Lisa, let's maybe take a little bit of a step back and talk about the role of an AFSL. So people may have heard what an AFSL is, but can you give us an overview of what an AFSL actually does?
Yeah, so an AFSL is an Australian financial services licence, and it provides the governing framework to the way that advisors operate. Practically, that includes advisor onboarding, compliance, ongoing management, product oversight, and reporting, and that all sits into one integrated system. The framework at its foundation focuses on delivering advice across the business and helping to drive consistency to make sure that the advice is compliant. For clients, that essentially means that there is a structured system sitting in the background behind their advisors, supporting them to provide advice.
Exactly. So it means advisors aren't out there operating alone. There's a team and there are processes and there's some support, as you said, which is really important. In practice, what's the role of that sort of framework and structure day to day?
Yeah. So day to day, the AFSL acts as a gatekeeper. So it sets the framework for product approvals, for policy and regulation, and ongoing monitoring. So the ongoing monitoring is really important. It's not just about compliance, but it's also about the way that advice is provided and training is provided to the advisors to make sure that they are on top of everything that they need to be on top of, not just from a product perspective, but from a regulatory perspective to make sure advisors are getting the best possible advice. From an AFSL perspective, so we provide guidance and training and a clear escalation pathway if something comes up that needs to be looked at or could be of concern for a client. This is important because from a client's perspective, there is someone sitting in the background looking at the advice going, is this appropriate? Is it still appropriate ongoing? And is there anything that we could have done better or that we should be doing better to make sure everything is within the client's best interest and we're getting the best possible outcomes for clients?
And I think that's really important. It's easy in many walks of life when you're very close to something to become a little bit relaxed or a little bit overconfident sometimes, and your own biases can kick in. So having somebody else or a group of people really to help those advisors with the ongoing analysis and checks and balances is a very valuable part of the process. I think it's also important to realise that it's not a one-off sort of process, isn't it? It's an ongoing.
Yeah, it's ongoing. It's ongoing. So there's always regular updates to advisors, refresher training on different types of product and technical strategy. There's product refreshers or even just providing awareness to advisors around product enhancements, or if we're looking from an insurance perspective, when new policies are delivered or product definitions change, because these types of things can also benefit a client, whereas in the past it may not have.
And having somebody in your role and having a team behind them allows our advisors to be really focused on understanding what's important to their clients and spending more time with their clients, which is really where we do add the value, isn't it? But it gives them that freedom to work within. I guess we often talk about discipline equals freedom. So you have that structure and that process, and that discipline allows you to have the freedom to have those really valuable conversations.
That's right. Yeah.
So I guess moving on to some of the headlines. Now, typically when we see headlines around financial products, it's usually not good news. It's usually when something's gone wrong. And one of the, I guess there's two most recent high profile issues that have come up around two companies, First Guardian and Shield. So when people hear about those names, what's the story? How did it happen? And what can we take from those?
Yeah, so what happened with those examples are really interesting examples because predominantly when we're hearing about failures, they're market failures. These ones are different because they're actually governance failures. People didn't see them coming. People felt blindsided and betrayed and unprotected. So those came about because of weak governance. So weak oversight, conflicts not being controlled within the business, advice was not delivered in the best interest of the client, and the products didn't have adequate due diligence. So the uncomfortable truth is a client will never see the governance structure that sits behind. It's more or less invisible for a client. They only see the result of governance gone wrong, and that's what these failures demonstrate. That's why the strength of an AFSL governance is really, really important because it protects you before something goes wrong rather than after the fact.
Absolutely. I think, just as you're working through that, there's a number of steps in that process. There's a number of different parties involved, isn't there, in something like that? You might have heard about the platforms that are involved. So the likes of Macquarie and Netwealth who've come to the table and said they're going to pay some money to make sure investors get most of their money back, which is great. There are advice firms and licenses involved, and there are individual advisors. So each of them should have a role to play in, I guess, the good governance. How did something like this First Guardian Shield go on for so long, and how do we play our role to do the best we possibly can? There's no guarantees, but we do the best we possibly can to make sure these sorts of things don't happen in our sphere.
Yeah, that's a good question. So for Shield and First Guardian, no one acted early enough. The red flags were there, but nobody adequately escalated the issues that were coming up or that they knew about. I think people saw it coming before it happened, but nobody actually raised the issue. The advisor behaviour, I guess, just took what was given to them and provided the advice that they were told to provide, which, sort of highlights lack of governance from an AFSL perspective. And I mean, the responsibility was widespread and nobody raised the issues. So I guess the lesson is that it's not about just spotting risks, it's also about acting on them. And in these cases, it was too late by the time they acted upon the issues.
I think that's a tricky one, isn't it, in terms of there are a number of parties, as I was sort of saying, and then to your point, people in that structure knew that there was, or had concerns, maybe didn't know in some areas, had concerns that maybe something wasn't quite right. There were red flags. They maybe raised them to different points in that process, but no one actually owned it to say, okay, we need to really stop this, or we need to change what we're doing in this space. So from my perspective, I think one thing that we find really important is that we are ultimately responsible for acting in the client's best interests. So as an AFSL, as an advisor, that's your role. There are other parties in that process who don't have that same financial responsibility, same fiduciary duty to act in the client's best interest as such. So I think that's where we see the value of advice really has a strong role to play because of the legal requirements we have, but also because of the ethical responsibilities that we take very seriously. So I guess if we take a step back from that, there's, a product provider comes with a product, it's on a platform, it's in the super funds, and we can recommend that. A lot of the legislation is written around product, so it comes up a lot. If we think about what products we can use and how we go about choosing products, where do we start with that?
Yeah. So the products that we use are governed by our investment committee, and they sit on a structured list that is reviewed consistently, constantly. So when we look at reviewing a product, we're looking at things like structure, liquidity, concentration, the strategy, and its alignment to the outcomes that we want to deliver as Evalesco as a business. The important thing to remember about these ongoing reviews of these products is if the benchmark of what we think a good product looks like with all those risk factors built in, it can be removed from the APL or if it's a new product being proposed to be put on the approved product list, it just won't get approved. And the important thing to remember is if there is something on the approved product list, it is ongoing reviewed. If we decide that that is not going to be suitable ongoing, it is taken out.
Yep. I think that's where a couple of things come in really handy there is experience. So, a lot of our team have been around for a while now and been through things like the global financial crisis and saw what happened to overly financially engineered products at that time. So we're very focused on if we don't 100% clearly understand the product and what it's investing in, then it won't come anywhere near getting in front of the client. It's also then having a committee so that people might have different experiences they can bring to the table, but also people bring different biases. So we're able to override some of that when we look at, and we use third-party research, other objective opinions as well, which really provides strength to that process.
And I think as well, it's also the training and ongoing support that we provide to the advisors, because you can't add something to the APL if advisors don't understand it. There's responsibilities and legislation put in place that an advisor needs to be able to explain a product to a client and understand that. If an advisor is not adequately able to explain a product to a client, how can they prove that it actually is within the best interest of a client to recommend?
Yep, absolutely. So what are some of the early warning signs that we look for from a governance perspective?
So the early warning signs, in the cases of Shield First Guardian, there was really aggressive marketing campaigns, cold calling, advice that didn't adequately consider the client's best interest. Essentially, the advice that was being provided to the clients was the same advice across all clients. So it was misleading, it was incomplete, and advisors, I don't think, really understood that it wasn't in the best interest of the client. So what we're looking for when we're having a look at that, the learnings that we sort of take from that is that we focus as well a lot on financial literature. So, educating our clients so they understand the recommendations that we're actually providing to them. Because the more that we can educate a client around the recommendations and the strategy that we're putting in place, the more that we can show to a client that the strategy and the recommendations and the products that we are wanting to put the client in are going to meet the client's goals and objectives. If we can't prove that, then we're probably not doing our jobs as advisors.
Yep. And so we talked about earlier, people didn't act as quickly as they can. So sometimes there's an escalation that may be required or, action that needs to be taken. How do we do that differently?
Yeah. Well, risk management is a cultural thing within our business. So we have culture inside of the business. This is something that we try to drive from the top down throughout the business, that risk management is everyone's responsibility, whether you're the CEO or whether you're the junior that's walked into the office for their first day. Risk management is everyone's responsibility. So no matter your role, if you see something that's gone wrong, it should be raised as an issue and then it can be addressed. We have reporting lines across the business. So when issues are raised, they are recorded, whether they are a breach or an issue, and then we look at them ongoing regularly. So what we do is we track all issues raised and we're looking for patterns. We are looking for things that might cause systemic issues across the business, because I guess in the type of role that I do managing the AFSL, we're looking for things that might turn into systemic risk and risk the AFSL or the advisors that sit underneath it. And that's 100% what we are trying to avoid. So we want to be on top of those so we can either look at ways where we can improve the process to reduce those issues coming up, or we are looking at training opportunities to provide to advisors or even the support team that sits in the back office to make sure that those issues reduce. The other thing about issues coming up is if we don't have that culture of people reporting things as they come up, sometimes it's really hard to fix a problem that you don't know about. So that culture is really, really important to make sure that we can continually improve things and protect the business and protect the clients.
Yeah. I think that's one of the things that we are very proud about is that culture of speaking up, of sharing ideas, of collaborating, owning our mistakes. People do make mistakes, and we just need to get onto those as quickly as possible. And I think the other thing that comes to mind in that regard is, as a business now, we're big enough that we can have the resources and the systems and processes and structure to stand behind our advisors and stand behind our clients. But we're small enough that we're still close to those clients on a daily basis. We're still close to those advisors on a day-to-day basis so that we can be assisting them and helping to keep them heading in the right direction. Thanks, Lisa. I think that's a great way to hopefully allay some fears, provide some clarity. Really, it comes down to the value of advice is around having that team behind you. We know that the individual advisor client relationship is very powerful, very important. And it's also great to have a team behind you to provide you with that support in regards to your requirements and help with minimising the risks that are associated with investing in general markets. So thank you for sharing your expertise. Thank you for all you do for our clients. And thank you for listening at home.